All right. Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman, and this week I am joined for a special interview with a special guest. We have a man who many of you have probably heard his voice before, although not on the show before. He is the play-by-play announcer for the UFC on ESPN. He's the host of the Fitz Nation podcast. He's Mr. Brendan Fitzgerald. And Brendan, we are happy to have you on the show, my man. How are you doing?
Thanks, Jonah. Amazing introduction. Fantastic. Happy to be with you, man.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. I put out a Twitter thread kind of teasing the episode the other day, and it seemed like people were excited. We are a UFC betting podcast. Obviously, most of our content comes in the form of weekly episodes where we kind of just go over every fight on UFC events for pretty much every card. We've had a streak for a little bit over a year, but I guess with you, we're going to do a little bit of evergreen content to kind of kick off the show. We'll talk about your job. You're doing play-by-play, and obviously the UFC has really embraced gambling recently. And then I told the people we'll do a little UFC 268 talk. I know that you're not able to necessarily give out picks, which is what the podcast is normally about,
Right.
We can we'll cover some storylines, and then I got a bunch of listener questions. We got some funny ones to go over towards the end of the show here.
All right. Let's go, man. Should be fun.
Let's go. So I guess the first thing to talk about is, the UFC historically has been an organization that has really embraced sports betting more than any other major sports organization out there, right? Like now we see, if you're watching the NBA or MLB, you see all these advertisements from different sports books, but the UFC has had live odds on the screen for years. They've had odds pre-fight on the screen for years. And they have this new deal with DraftKings, obviously, that's like 5 years, over $100 million invested. How has your job kind of changed on a week-to-week basis? You're calling all the fights, and now we have all this gambling content kind of thrown in there. How has your job changed in how it regards to involving gambling content along with calling the fights?
Well, it hasn't really changed from a week-to-week basis on play-by-play. I guess we mentioned the odds, but John Anik was already doing that before I started with the UFC. So I just thought that's just kind of an interesting tidbit at the start of the fight. It's easy to watch a football game and just, it's Cowboys and Packers, right? You don't have to know the point spread or whatever. And not that you have to know it for a fight, but it's just an interesting tidbit because not everybody's this name brand. So since joining the UFC in 2017, I've always thought it was kind of an interesting just piece of information to throw out before the fight. What's changed is that we've incorporated live odds on the screen throughout the fight. And that is something that I think is pretty cool. If somebody's a minus 200 favorite and at the end of round one, they're a plus 200 underdog, that's something where, the betting fan would find that interesting. Or somebody that was, usually we don't overdo it, but if somebody had a big first round and now they're minus 750 and then the second round happens and now it's a coin flip heading into the third round, that's like a narrative. It helps tell the story of how good and how back and forth of a fight it's been. So really, in terms of like the play-by-play job, the only thing that's changed is that we'll incorporate live betting odds on the screen throughout the broadcast. I can see it on my stat screen. It's helping to tell the story. But it doesn't really change the job. Like I'm not really digging too deep on lines like when I'm doing fighter research, that's for the gambling show, which has also started since I've, joined the UFC, and we kind of started UFC on the Line, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but that's obviously like a separate specialized gambling show, but that doesn't always cross paths with my play-by-play preparation. They're kind of two different things.
Yeah, and that was just kind of a natural segue by you. You can tell who's the professional here in this conversation. Obviously, On the Line is something you've been with the UFC for 4 years calling events. On the Line is something that's more new, kind of towards the UFC on ESPN Plus era. You have that show every week with Nick Kalikas, obviously, and Yanni the Greek, who is a well-known name in the MMA gambling community. Talk to me a little bit about that show. You're the host, and like from what we've had conversations before about it, it's like something you're very into and a show that you're kind of able to make your own. Talk to us just a little bit about that show. I think a lot of our viewership is probably someone that tunes into that on a weekly basis or for pay-per-views,
Yeah.
I think people are interested in that. Talk to me a little bit about how that journey has kind of been learning with those guys.
It has been quite a journey from where it started. I don't know if anybody watched like the early episodes. They're still on Fight Pass. If you go up and when did they start? I know we were doing them in 2019. We were doing them just once a month up until this year. Really, we're just doing them for pay-per-views. And it started in the studio that's in the UFC headquarters way before we had the Apex, before we even bought the Apex, or before it was like, operational. And the studio was small, and it looked a little cable accessy, and the desk was small, and it was Yanni on one side, and then it was a fighter. We would fly in a fighter. So Bisping was on the other. Instead of having two gamblers, it was gambler and fighter. And it was like Bisping did it, DC did it, Woodley did a couple of them, Michael Chiesa did one. And what was funny about that is like the fighters they don't know the lines. Like they're not talking about it from a betting perspective. They're just like, I remember Bisping threw like $300 on BJ Penn at like plus 400 against Ryan Hall because he's like buddies with BJ Penn. And then like Woodley, same thing. And then I think our producers were just like, all right, like the fighters, the gist of it was like, let's get the gambler's perspective and let's get the analyst perspective, the fighter's perspective. But you don't really need that on a betting show. You don't, you see that in football. You don't need a former quarterback to talk about betting lines in an NFL game. So they're just like, let's just get another gambler and then we'll do it that way. And that's worked out really well for Yanni and Nick to bounce ideas. They're speaking the same language. Before it was tough to host the show, to tee up Yanni, get his thoughts, and then to tee up Tyron Woodley and get his thoughts. They're coming at it from two totally different things. And the show wasn't very coherent in terms of having one voice and like what we're talking about. So to have the gamblers be the ones that are kind of the analysts and bouncing it back and forth, it's come a long way. And then obviously we, break in a shiny new studio that looks really good, and the DraftKings partnership, and, put a lot of effort into just, making it the best possible home for UFC gambling knowledge and advice and picks and that sort of stuff. So it's come a long way in the few years that we've done it.
Yeah, it certainly has. I remember some of those earlier episodes, and it's interesting because you mentioned like in NFL games, you don't need an ex-quarterback talking about the betting odds, but you do sometimes need an ex-quarterback, or not even sometimes, oftentimes in the booth kind of as a color commentary guy. I think that's obviously something the UFC has nailed. We see you in the booth with guys like Bisping, Dom Cruz on a weekly basis calling play-by-play. I think it's kind of more interesting the way it is now currently with the betting show, where you have two gamblers who kind of come at it a little bit differently. Those who have watched the show with you, obviously, and if you haven't, you should check it out on ESPN Plus. It's on Fight Pass too, right? You're in both places.
Is it on ESPN Plus?
I think it's like archived on ESPN Plus. I don't know.
Oh, is it really? Okay. It's on. I think it's only on Fight Pass. The promo reads that I read is it's only on UFC Fight Pass. Sometimes we'll put out a free episode on YouTube every once in a while. I mean, if you search for it on YouTube, but it's a Fight Pass show right now, and I think maybe we get to ESPN Plus, but then money's involved, right? ESPN Plus is like, yeah, we'll love it, and then UFC's like, okay, cool, you got to pay us for it, and then exactly. That holds it back. So we'll see. I think it's going to continue to grow, though. I mean, we've done, instead of one per month, I think I counted we're going to do like 25 or 26 episodes this year. So, right. 2 per month, a lot of fight nights involved, certainly the bigger fight nights like Dillashaw and Sandhagen, we did one for, and Curtis Blades and Derek Lewis, and some of those bigger name fight cards. Then we've done those, but yeah, I mean, it's a fun show. It's a unique way to get ready for a weekend of fights instead of just hearing all fight analysis. It's like, what are you going to put your money on?
Yeah, exactly. And the good news for you is that anyone listening to this show most likely has a Fight Pass subscription, since the majority of us we're spending our time watching old fights in preparation for the current week all week. And that's obviously the spot to go for all UFC taping purposes. I kind of want to switch gears a little bit here and kind of move towards a preview episode a little bit towards UFC 268. We're recording this the Friday before UFC 267. So we actually have fights like tomorrow morning. I know are you currently at home in Nevada right now?
Yeah, Vegas, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are fights for you tomorrow? Like 7:30?
7:30 in the morning. Yep. 7:30 until about 2:00.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. Just wake up and fire it up. Usually like you put the kid to bed and then like the rest of them, then you can really kind of hone in on the big fights. So it's always a challenge with those daytime cards when you're like doing dad family stuff while trying to like watch the fights on your phone or disappear to your office and stuff, but I'll make it happen. It's a big enough event.
Yeah, you'll make it work. We could put a couple of things aside in order to see two UFC title fights going
Yeah,
down tomorrow
exactly.
in
Exactly.
Abu Dhabi. There's always a little bit of finessing that is able to be done in order to do that. But yeah, early morning of fights. But next week, I think this episode is going to come out on Monday, so everyone will already have known UFC 267 results, so we don't have to give our takes that everyone could make fun of after
Yeah,
the
right.
fact with their hindsight bias. But talk to me a little bit about UFC 268. First of all, are you going to be in New York at all next week?
No, I won't. I'll be home, and then I'm doing the next 2 fight cards after the 13th and 20th, so getting
Right.
ahead of the game on that. I got Contender Series finale on Tuesday, stay home from New York, busy in, the middle of November.
There you go. Yeah. So you've been doing a lot of these contender series cards recently because there's a point when you were like alternating every other week, and I've seen you in the booth a couple of times doing contender series. So obviously not in New York for next week. I'm actually going in New York next week.
No, I know. You and your buddy Felix are
Yeah.
front and center. You guys are
Yeah.
crazy.
I'm flying home for it. You got to do what you got to do. But hopefully I'll be in Vegas for the Holloway versus
Yeah, man.
Ooh, almost
Yeah,
forgot.
you're
Holloway
Rodriguez.
against
Yeah.
Jair Rodriguez, yeah, on the 13th. I'm excited for that card. Obviously, a striker's delight. But let's talk a little bit about UFC 268. And I don't want to go too deep into the betting lines. I don't want to take all the content for On the Line coming up next
Yeah,
week.
yeah.
But talk to me a little bit, like, what do you think is the most compelling story going into fight week? Because I think there's a few fights that kind of tell or have a lot of stories behind them that people are excited about, kind of the narrative going into fight week.
I mean, it's 2 title rematches at the top of the bill. Um, and the main event is just it's fit for New York City. You know, like when you go to New York City, when you're in Madison Square Garden, you got to bring something that's extra special. When you go to LA, when you go to New York City, like stuff like that, like you just need the extra juice to a fight. And, you know, Usman and Covington, the rivalry that it is after what they did in 2019, like to me, it's don't get tricky about it, right? The 2 biggest fights are the 2 biggest fights on the night. The title fights, they're the rematches. They got storylines built in. Um, they got a rivalry built in because of what's happened. And then you have surrounding circumstances of like Rose already pulled a massive upset and won her title back in Madison Square Garden 4 years ago. And the way that she looked against Zhang Weili the last time, and then Usman and Covington is just going to be heated and trash talk all week and no respect and everything that you want to build up a fight. That's what it has. So
Yeah.
that's, I mean, it's not very hard to kind of pick like the big storylines. And then Gaethje Chandler obviously is just, you go down the card, it's amazing. Frankie Edgar, Chito Vera is amazing. Billy Quarantillo and Shane Burgos, but they're not going to steal the headlines. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you're going to build the fight because of the main event.
Yeah, I think that's certainly fair. And currently, the betting odds have Kamaru Usman about a 3-1 favorite to retain his title and beat Colby Covington in his rematch. Rose Namajunas, a much smaller favorite, closer to a pick'em against Weili Zhang in their rematch after Rose got that head kick knockout earlier this year over Weili. I guess we can kind of, speaking of the 115 strawweight weight class there with Rose Namajunas and Weili Zhang, I wanted to ask you, this was a question we got, and we'll kind of move in towards the listener questions here in a bit. I put out a Twitter thread, and everyone seemed to be excited to ask you questions about your job, Brendan. So I'll toss them at you. But one of them that I got that kind of parries exactly off of what we were talking about is I got a question that's kind of just straight up opinion. Curious what you think. A buddy, watcher of the show named Timothy, he asked, who do you think is the best 115er of all time in the women's strawweight division? And I think there's 2 obvious answers, right? We have Joanna, who was one of the first real stars in women's MMA within the UFC, retained her title bench. And then you have Rose Namajunas, who's a fighter who obviously dethroned her once and then beat her again in the rematch. So I guess it's just kind of an opinionated question, but an interesting topic headed into, you know, the UFC 268 fight week.
So this division, the sport is still very young where I don't like the recency bias thing, but it's like, how can it not be Rose right now? But on Saturday night, if Zhang Weili beats her, well, then it's going to be Rose and Zhang Weili potentially, and then they'll settle it in a trilogy. This division is too young to like definitively say, here's the greatest of all time. Joanna and Jacek almost set the record for title defenses before she got upset and stuff like that. But it's like, okay, but Rose is the one who beat her, and Rose is the champion right now. And then Rose beat her again. And then Rose kind of flukily lost her title after she looked amazing in the first round against Jessica Andrade. and then she won it back with a head kick knockout. So it's tough to say anybody but Rose, but it seems weird because she's still in the middle of her career, you
Right.
know, and she's a coin flip against Zhang Weili, who just lost, got caught in that fight in Jacksonville, but who before that had won what, like 20 straight fights or 21 straight fights, and then
Yeah.
could very well win her title back. So like the greatest of all time thing, I mean, it's fodder for talk shows and stuff like that, but there's just no correct answer to it. And especially in this case, it's too young, you know, like in 25 years, greatest strawweight. Okay. Now it's going to be Joanna, or depending on what she does, Rose, Zhang Weili. Their careers are still developing. And then whoever comes up and then wins the title and holds it for a long time. You know what I mean? Like it's who's the greatest women's fighter of all time is something that you can have arguments about more readily than the greatest strawweight of all time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it's fair. And I honestly think that in general, it's tough to talk about that in weight classes. Like there's a similar situation at featherweight in the men's division. Like Jose
Yeah.
Aldo Jr. considered like the greatest for such a long period of time. And then Max Holloway beats him twice. Obviously, Max is someone who's put together like super long win streaks within the UFC, one of the most accomplished fighters, still one of the pound for pound best fighters in the world, in my opinion. But like, if I feel like any division is kind of tough to have this like greatest of all time talk when the sport itself, not just the weight classes individually, are so young.
Like it's recency bias with every single year because of how young the sport is. We're talking about the equivalence of us saying who's the best blank of all time in MMA is the equivalence of saying who's the best baseball player of all time in 1930.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that's what it is. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, there's Babe Ruth and then whoever else was good at the time, but we don't have looking forward all this stuff. You know, when you say who's the greatest basketball player of all time, you can go back 80, 100 years and be like, here's the 4 guys, here's the 3 guys, here's the guys in the conversation. In MMA, it's like, it's just the new ones. Like, who's the best featherweight of all time? Well, like, you can make an argument it's Volkanovski. Like
Right.
he beat Max twice,
Exactly.
and he was like 1-1 at some point, and he's won like 20 straight fights, has never lost in the UFC, was just in a great title fight where he beat up Brian Ortega pretty good, and you know, escaped some tough situations. So you could say it's him now, you know, and we thought it was Aldo, and then it was not Aldo, and then it was Max, and now it's not Max. Now it's the guy who's the current champion.
Right.
So you can do that in so many different weight classes. I feel the nature of how young the sport is.
I think that's probably a good way to put it. Question I had, and this was one that I expected to get, and it comes from Elliot. He asked, "Who is your favorite fighter to call?" And then I guess I have a follow-up question. What is your favorite fight that you've ever called in general?
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I think. I mean, tough question to answer because you got to pick, and then like, well, what about this guy? Justin Gaethje is like maybe my favorite fighter to watch because name the fight that he's been in where you're like, I wish I did something else with my time then. You know what I mean? It's either he sparks him in the first round or it's an epic battle with Dustin Poirier. Or like even his fight against Khabib was amazing. Like I think he was a few leg kicks away from beating Khabib. Nobody ever talks about that because Khabib wins, retires. But it's just like, I don't know, man. It seemed like he was kind of compromised on the feet. But I called 2 of Gaethje's, and then it's like who I have the chance to call too. Gaethje, right. I've called 2 of his fights. Both were first round knockouts against Cerrone and against James Vick. And then my other one is Charles Oliveira. I've called like because of the nature of the shows that I did and the spots that he was in for a long time. Like they were throwing him non-ranked guys for a long time. He fought Felder in 2017 and he lost. And then I called him in Sao Paulo a couple of times. I called him breaking the submission record. I called him in Fortaleza. I called him in Rochester, New York. He's one of those fighters that I've just lined up with. I've probably called 5 or 6 of his fights. And then sure enough, he rises up and he becomes the champion. And like all of those fights, he was winning the performance of the night bonus. Like every single one, he was finishing the guy and he was winning a bonus. And when you see a, Brazilian in Brazil win, like in his home city of Sao Paulo, the roof blows off the place. So now that he's champion, it's just pretty cool to see the rise that he was on after how many years in the game. So I'll give you those 2.
Yeah. And what about favorite fight that you've ever called?
Favorite fight, I usually zoom in on 3. I zoom in on Cerrone setting the wins and finish record in Denver at the 25th anniversary show when he beat Mike Perry by armbar. He's like from Colorado, and it was the 25th anniversary. There's a lot of special circumstances with that. Uriah Faber's return in Sacramento, first round knockout, first TKO since like 2007. That was amazing. And then I always say the Korean Zombie when he fought in Greenville, I just feel like I had a good call. And he beat, it was a knockout in a minute. And then like I feel like it was a good piece of sports television. Like I had a good call. It was obviously an interesting, exchange, fun fight, knockout early. And then me and Bisping didn't say anything for like 45 seconds and the stadium was on fire. And like the visuals of being able to call a big moment and then shut up and then having the crowd like be able to carry it. That's like some of my favorite stuff in sports broadcasting, no matter the sport, no matter if I'm calling it or not, is when the announcer can just shut up and the crowd is so good and they can tell the story with, what's happening in the arena. And that's kind of my one there.
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't mention the call for when Cerrone broke the finishes record. I know you mentioned one of your favorite fights, but like for me, that's one of my favorite calls that
Yeah,
you've
that's
done
the
with,
one.
yeah,
He
with
broke
the
the
all-time
finishes record.
Yeah, the all-time leader in wins, all-time. But you said it for the last one you mentioned, like you thought you had a really great call of the Korean Zombie. Like I
Oh
think
yeah.
yeah,
The Cerrone one too. Yeah. You know
yeah,
what was funny? That Cerrone one in Denver that night, we had audio issues like at the end of the night. Like it didn't sound great. So it was almost like frustrating a little bit. Like in my ear, I'm just like, I'm checking with the truck. I'm like, does this sound like bad to you guys? And they're like, yeah, we're having audio problems. So I just feel like when you, like I don't remember being like sitting back like, yes, I nailed that one. Because I remember being like, what is with this audio? The crowd is loud, but it sounds weird and stuff like that. So maybe that's why.
yeah. And I guess that segues into the next question I had. This one comes from Sparring with Reality. He responded on Twitter. He asked, "What's the craziest production snafu that you've been a part of?" So I don't know if you're able to tell all the stories, but
Oh
you just
yeah.
gave
I
us an
mean,
insight. What's the craziest one, man?
UFC related.
It could be UFC related or outside the UFC. I mean, whatever comes to
Yeah.
mind.
So when you're coming up in the business and you deal with like low budgets and local TV, you're just going to deal with crappy equipment and not a lot of resources and that sort of stuff. So like I remember in Texas, I was at a high school football game. I was doing a live shot for the late news, doing highlights. And like one of the best, but you'll learn great skills because you'll just learn how to make it work. So like I'm looking at a camera with no monitor. I'm doing highlights. I just knew the plays, right? And it's up to you to just like in your head kind of time it, especially if you don't have, I didn't have a producer telling me like next. And so next play. Because in Boston, I
Right.
would call highlights all the time when we were on the road with the Red Sox or Bruins games and stuff like that. And if you have a good producer, you can work out what the highlight's going to be. And then he just says next play in your ear. And then you know to go to the next play. But in Texas, I didn't have that. I just had somebody on camera and they're like, you're on. And like right before the shot, it rained. It dumped. Like sometimes in South Texas, I mean, it's just like tropical storm rain will just roll through at the drop of a hat and it'll just downpour for like 12 minutes. And so we caught it like right during that. The light went out. I had no thing. I was still young in my career. I wasn't that seasoned on air yet. I mean, it still got through it just fine.
Yeah.
That was like what comes to me in terms of just like, what the hell was that? Like after the shot, I'm soaking wet. I'm just like, what the hell? Like I just did that. UFC wise, like I guess in Chile a couple of years ago, we did a show in May of 2018, May of 2018, Santiago, Chile. And it was Kamaru Usman, oddly enough, main evented against Damian Maia. And the truck, so the TV truck was in Rio de Janeiro the week before for the pay-per-view. And then they were going to drive it across South America, go to Chile and use it there. Well, it got stopped at like the border. Like Chile's customs were being jerks and they were demanding a lot of money or something. So our TV truck like didn't make it.
Right.
So we didn't have like the normal, and in South America, the TV trucks aren't great. Even the one that we do get for the Brazil shows and whatever, there's still like a lot to be desired. This isn't my department. I just trust the people that work in the TV trucks to tell me. And so we had some makeshift TV truck. Couldn't talk to the producers. They couldn't see. Usually that camera That's for announcer reactions.
Yeah.
That's also for the producers to watch us, so that if they give us a message or a note or that sort of thing, we don't always have to push talk back and answer them. We can give them a thumbs up and they can see us, or like they know if we're looking for something, they'll be like, what's wrong? You know, it's like so that they can keep their eye on us all night too. And then somewhere along the line, we have crazy reactions. And they're like, why don't we just show that?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was that. I mean, UFC is so buttoned up almost all the time where it's just like, you know, there's a lot of stuff where, okay, it probably feels to the production staff like we got to make something happen and get on the air. But, you know, it's network level. It's like top level. So it's nothing compared to crappy equipment and crazy stuff like in small market television.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you're watching live, like it's at the point
you don't know.
Like, yeah,
like in Chile, if you watch it back, you wouldn't know.
Yeah,
you know,
no,
but the production staff was just like, remember that? That was awful. And I'm just like, well, on TV, it looked fine. It was fine.
Exactly. It's one of those things where like you're more self-conscious as a company than than it appears to the general public. We'll do one or two more questions and then we'll get you out of here. I do want to talk a little bit about your podcast before we leave, but we got a question from our boy Felix, who a mutual friend.
Yeah.
He asked the question. He said, at this point in your life, are you a better skateboarder or piano player? Because last time I saw you, you were skateboarding. You were talking about how you took a nasty fall on your Instagram. You're always posting like your piano. You've been playing for over a year. Saw some Red Hot Chili Peppers on the feed the other day. Like which hobby is Brendan Fitzgerald currently better at between those two?
So I don't know if you guys saw this, but I retired from skateboarding. I put out a tweet about a week ago. I said I'd like to announce my retirement from skateboarding. No further questions. So the skateboarding thing, there's a couple of reasons for that. So piano, without a doubt. Piano is I play piano every single day. I'm obsessed with it. And like within like 2 years or 5 years, I want to actually like play in public. Like I want to go to a restaurant, not like sing and be like, come watch me, but like, you know, a piano player in a hotel lobby, right? Or just playing in the background at a cocktail lounge or something. Like I want to do that. I'm going to pursue doing that. But skateboarding was something where I was just like, I needed some excuse to get me outside. Like, and then there was a skate park like right next to my son's school that he was going to for kindergarten at the beginning of the year. And I was just like, oh, geez, I get a skateboard, roll around on this, whatever. And it wasn't really the falls. That was part of it. But my son switched schools. So now his school is like a walk from our house. So now like to go to a skate park, I have to drive out of my way like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I'm like, okay, like, do I love it that much? And then also I was listening to Mark Manson's book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. I don't know.
You can curse. You can.
Yeah, I know, but I just don't. I try not to make it a habit.
Gotcha.
But anyways, I don't want to get caught on a hot mic that does matter, and then it's trouble.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, like he was saying, like, you know, you find success in the things you're willing to struggle for, and I was just like, I'm not willing to struggle for skateboarding, like, because I know I'm going to keep falling. Like, it's just a matter of time until you sprain your wrist or you bust your hip again or whatever. And so I'm just like, I'm like 39. Like, I don't need this. If I really wanted to do it, I would. And if my son by chance happens to get into it as he grows up, then I'll probably get back into it with him. It'd be cool. But like, it's not going to be a solo thing for me. So skateboarding's out.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Well, your tweet said that several factors went into the decision, so I was hoping
those were the factors.
Yeah, we got the
school change was a big one. School change was a big one. Now that I'm not going by a park, you know.
That maybe that'll be the headliner for when I put out the podcast to sell it. Find out the reasons that the Brendan Fitzgerald quit skateboarding. Let's do one more question and then we'll get you out of here. This is from Patrick Allen, a funny one, and actually one that I'm kind of curious. I think it was meant as a joke, but as someone who does podcasting about the UFC, I find it interesting. Is Nasrat Haqparast versus Kelvin Gastelum every MMA commentator's worst nightmare, and why?
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously never going to happen. Weight class. Well, Gastelum could drop down to 170 and Haqparast is 155. So you think that there's a world where if he decides to come up, like it's not like they're a heavyweight and flyweight.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think we'd be able to distinguish them. So like, I don't know if this is in reference to like, I mistakenly called him that. Do you remember that?
Yeah, no, I do, and
Yeah.
it's also in reference to like on my show. So Jared Gooden and Jared Gordon fought back to back weeks, and
Right.
we do every show. And I messed it up like 3 times on my
But
show, so
they
everyone
look
makes fun of
very
me.
different,
They look
but their
very different.
names are
Yes,
very similar.
exactly.
Yeah,
So it's a little
exactly.
different, but yeah,
Well, so the funny thing about when I called Hackpress Gastelum was when he was walking out, and usually because he came after Gastelum into the UFC, that's the first thing people mention about him. Or like it's one of those things. All right, here's the guy. Oh, it looks like Kelvin Gastelum, blah, blah,
right,
blah. And like I thought that to be, okay, it's fun to have fun with it a couple times, but Nasrat's now in his UFC career and he's getting older, and it's just like, okay, we don't have to tie this together every single time. So I was just like, might be a little not I don't know if disrespectful is the right word, but let's describe him on his own terms, not who
right.
he looks like. And so I didn't say it at all. I just left that part out. And I was just like, yeah, like I think everybody on Twitter can joke about it and it can be a thing. But I was just like, I don't need to say that on his walk or like during the fight. Oh, he really looks like Kelvin Gastelum. Everybody
Right.
already knows that. So by not saying it, I never got it out of my system. And then I'm like thinking it. And then I just said it. I was like, oh, Gastelum throws a leg kick or something like that.
Yeah.
And then I think that I don't think he liked that. I haven't seen him since or anything like that. But he called me on Twitter because I think I said one time that he wasn't. What did I say? I think I said he represents Qatar and not Afghanistan. I truly thought that he had like a different heritage or whatever, but it's Afghanistan. And then he represents Germany, which I knew he was from
Right.
Germany via some other country. And so that, and then I called it the Afghani flag, right? And he didn't get on me for this. He was just like, bro, you called me Gastelum, and before you said I was from a different country, something like that. I was like, I know, dude, I'm sorry. And but I said, he's got the Afghani flag, draped across his shoulders. And somebody else was just like, dude, it's the Afghan flag. It's not the Afghani flag. And I was just like, I'm giving up. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Nasrat Hackpress. I'm just gonna tee up whoever else. If I ever call another I've messed up on him like 4 times in 4 different ways, and I can't get it right.
It's funny because we were talking about like production snafus. You can never really hear it. That is obviously like the one
There's
that people
one.
heard.
Yeah.
And
Right. Oh yeah,
turned into a joke, pretty harmless if you ask me. All right, we will get you out of here. Fitz, I want to give you a chance to plug your podcast because you've been having some fighters on, doing some interviews. You've been teasing like multiple comebacks. We had the Paul Felder. We were teasing a comeback on on your YouTube. I saw that. I saw an Alan Joe Bain tease. Talk to the people. Where can they find you on Twitter, YouTube, your podcast, all that stuff?
Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Brendan Fitz TV. And then my podcast is called Fitz Nation. So if you're looking for a podcast, search Fitz Nation. And that's like long form interviews with UFC fighters. My YouTube channel, you can find the podcast there, but my YouTube channel is just my name, Brendan Fitzgerald. And it's turned into way more than the podcast. I'm just like the thing with Felder, we were just sitting in the broadcast thing there was like 10 minutes until the Contender Series started. And I was just like, Paul, let's do a 2-minute thing. And so I've started realizing the value of the access that I have, and especially I can't wait to go back out on the road for my YouTube channel because I go to some pretty interesting places. And like when Dan Hooker was main eventing against Paul Felder in New Zealand, and like I was just like sitting in the lobby and Dan Hooker came and he sat next to me on the couch in the lobby, like waiting for something. And we're just chatting for like 5 minutes. Not that I'm going to I don't want to be the guy that gets their camera out for every single thing.
Right.
But I was just like, my YouTube channel doesn't have to be long form podcast or nothing. Like I have access to like, oh, this is what the studio looks like in the Apex, or this is what the Octagon looks like, or different stuff that I could show you behind the scenes that you'll see on my social media channels and stuff. But I'm just like, well, let me just throw it on YouTube. Some people like that. And sure enough, sometimes you like, like I did the stare, like I just shot the stare down. I'm announcing the stare down between Paulo Costa and Marvin Vettori. I was just like, let me just get my phone out and like, this is my view, and it's kind of a cool thing. So just keep uploading fun stuff. But the podcast, I've taken a few weeks off. I just got way too busy in October in the Contender Series and a bunch of shows. And then I don't know if you know this, Jonah, but this is the world premiere of my new setup here.
I
like with
did
the
notice
light.
it's different than the one. I see the 25-year anniversary in the
So like
background, but I noticed it was
usually,
different.
like when I've gone in the past, oh, I'm turning my computer. It's not. So like I've done, this has been my background and I would
Right.
shoot it from here, but then I had to get out a tripod every time and wire it all up. This, I'm just like, I just want to sit at my desk and hit go. So I might even do more stuff on my YouTube channel now that it's all set up, like reactions to some of the fight cards and different stuff like that. Maybe shorter interviews, like, I have good connections with fighters. So like when Calvin Kattar announces that he's coming back against Giga Chikadze, I could just text him and be like, Calvin, let's do a 10-minute interview or 5-minute interview or whatever. So I don't know if that's going to be part of it, but yeah, I got to get fired back up on the podcast this fall.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm honored that you broke out the new studio look. It's not a new
I
studio,
mean,
but the new look.
first one, this is the cold open, when they
Yeah.
open a hotel before it's really open. Like there's a pile of shit there. I just ordered those lights. I can change color.
Yeah, they look good. I need to get the lights too. For the people who aren't watching in video
Lights make
form.
everything. You know
Yeah,
what I
for
mean?
people who aren't watching in
Lights
video
do
form, I mean, we're going like rainbow colored in Fitz's background right now. We went from a light blue to a dark blue to a red. There's a green in there.
lights
Like,
do everything. We were like looking at new houses. I don't know if we're gonna move or not, but we were like looking at new houses, and it's just like if you put up different light fixtures, man, it turns a $400,000 house into a $600,000 house. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I was just like, let me get some cool lights in the background of my shot, and then we'll see what's what.
there
So
you go. Well, I appreciate you showing off the new background, describing some of the reasons behind the skateboarding retirement. And of
Yes,
course,
the important stuff.
yeah, of course, your time discussing UFC 268 and MMA betting content. Well, you guys can find Brendan on Twitter at Brendan Fitz TV. That's also the Instagram, YouTube, just straight up his name, and then obviously the Fitz Nation podcast for some of those longer form interviews. I'm Jonah Shiffman. We are signing off from the Undisputed Show presented by FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see you guys next time.